In this video, we'll build a complete Node RESTful API, which has the CRUD operation, so the create, read, update, and delete endpoints. And we'll also be following the MVC pattern, so the model view controller pattern, which is the most common design pattern there is for building an API. So in the previous video, we just made a simple GET request, and we also installed Postman to make our requests easier for the other methods. And we just did a GET request, and we just got this hard-coded JSON value, which is a grocery list. So we'll be building the backend for like a CRUD application for a grocery list. So we'll be able to create a new item, or get all the grocery items back, or update an item, or delete an item, and then eventually we'll hook this up to a front end like Angular and be able to do this. But for now, we'll focus on the API itself. So the first thing we want to do is we want to take a look at the models. So okay, let's just create a folder for it. So we'll create the models, and we'll create a grocery model. So we'll just say grocery.js, and this is where we'll handle the structure of our data, let's say, and this is where we perform any operations with our data, such as fetching it or something like that. And this, we may want to do this asynchronously, but just for now, we'll just return the hard-coded data so we can figure out how to structure the MVC application. So because we're in Node, we're able to use the module exports, because what we want to do is we want to export this class, and this class is essentially the structure of our data. So we can have this grocery class here like this, and a class can have a constructor, and a constructor is just what happens when the class is initialized, what runs. So hopefully you're familiar with object-oriented programming, but if not, what we're doing is we're setting the new instance of a grocery. So let's say we want to add a new grocery item. We can say this ID equals ID, and this item equals item. So then if we were to create a new grocery instance, or we wanted to add a new grocery, when we call that class grocery, we call the constructor, we will be able to pass in 2 arguments to it and set a particular grocery. So that's just some object-oriented programming stuff. And we'll also, what we'll do is we'll make it so we don't have to instantiate a new grocery object to be able to fetch all the data. So rather than using the new keyword and creating a new grocery, grocery 1, grocery 2, and all that, we can create a static method. So a static method is just something we can call on the class itself rather than the instance of the class, and that's going to come in handy if we want to return data for all of the groceries rather than opposed to creating a new instance of that object. So what I'll do is I'll just cut out this grocery thing here, and I will return that. So the idea is we want to visit a route, and when we visit a route, we want to do something, and we want to do something with a particular type of data. So the MVC pattern, we have our data sort of defined or retrieved through the model. So the model is responsible for the data, and we also want to receive this data in a particular view. So this is our view here. It's just the browser itself, and when we're dealing with an API or something like that, we might not render it to the view per se. We might have the data, like a front-end framework handle the view case. And the controller connects the view to the data. So we make a request. We want some data. We want this data here. We need to request the data, and if we request the data, we do something to be able to connect that data to the view, so we control it to be able to do that action, and then we could display in the view or use that data in a view somewhere. So we've done the model now. So what the next step to do is handle the routes. So I'll go ahead and I'll just make a routes folder. So we want to, rather than go to this localhost 3000, so imagine this is a placeholder for our website, so like www.website.com. Let's say our website, the API could be displaying different types data, so we'll be focusing on a grocery list. But let's say there was some other sort of to-do list or something like that. We might want a different case for that, so we might want /to-do, but we will want in this case /groceries. So we need a particular route for that, and the route can be sort of found through our entry point. So rather than having this get request here that has this slash, which effectively means just going to the website or requesting the website without any slug or anything like that, what we can do rather than a get request here is we can say use, and we can say use let's say /groceries. So whenever we go to the URL /groceries, we'll be able to do something. And in the groceries routes, that's where we're going to have the ability to have a create, a read, an update, or delete. So that's why we don't use a get request here. We just want to use a certain route or a certain endpoint if we hit that groceries URL. So let's say you visit the website /groceries. We want to be able to handle those routes. So for now I'll just say grocery routes, and this is to be created and imported. And I'm expecting to import this, so I'll just do this ahead of time. So we have the grocery routes that we're expecting, and this will be required from our routes folder. And it's not created just yet, but we will create this. So, okay, and we'll come back to this. So in our routes folder, now what we're able to do is, well, firstly we're going to need Express in the file. So let's go ahead and just copy that in there like that. We will need to have a controller in here, but just for now we can use a router from the Express package. So let's just make a router, and this is responsible for routing. So now that I have called the router in a variable, I'm able to call that. So let's say we have our get request now. So router.get, and this is where we're going to need to do something if we hit that endpoint. So what's happening is, in our index.js file, we've created a Node server, and we're using Express, and we have this server that's constantly listening for requests. If we hit the endpoint of the website /groceries, we can go into these grocery routes, because we could have a get request, but we could also have a put request or a post request or a delete request or something like that. So we go into these grocery routes, and this is where we are doing something. So one of the CRUD operations. So in this first case, we're using the get request, and this is why we need the router, and we need to do something with that request. And recall in that MVC sort of pattern, we need to hook up the the view with the model, and to be able to do that, to be able to get the data from the model, we need a controller. So some sort of controller is going to go in here, and we're going to need to import that. And we'll work on that next. And finally, we will need to export this. So this route is available in our index file here, these grocery routes here. So we can just say module.exports, and we can just export the router, which contains the get request and its controller. So we're exporting this in this file here. So we import it, or we require it, and then if we hit that endpoint, we'll handle it in a certain way. So that's just handling the route. Now we need to handle the controller, and once again I'll create the we'll be using the controller here. So I'm going to say, actually let's just make the controller first. So I'm going to create this folder, and I'm going to call it controllers, and I'll create a file called grocery.js, and we so recall that the controller is the the middleman between the data and the route, or the view, depending on how you're looking at it. So this data here, fetch all, we want to be able to use this data and access it through our view through the route. So that's why we have this controller here, and since we need this data, we need to import this data. So we can just say we'll have this constant grocery here, and I'm just using a capital G there just because it's it's the model, it's the class that's defining the structure of a grocery, and also the properties and the methods associated with the grocery. So the grocery class, and all we really have to do here is call this fetch all function. So all we have to do, and we can export this model, and we'll call it get all groceries, and this will be a asynchronous function. This is just an arrow function for now, but it will be asynchronous later. So what we can do is it takes a request, a response, and it can also take this next function, and we'll get into these in a bit more detail. And this is a common pattern you'll see all throughout Node. Is essentially the whole node is it's a server, and you're just constantly waiting for a request, and you want to handle those requests, and all the requests in the case of an API are asynchronous. So they're all of the functions, they take a request or a response, and they also can call a next function, but we'll see that later on. Just for now, all we really need to do is just send that data back. So there's this method on the response. So we get a request. We get the request when we visit the website. So whatever the website is /groceries, that will make the get request. Then when we go to this route, this get request will have a controller here. So this is this get all groceries controller, and we need to import this into our routes section. So we can say, okay, the constant variable grocery controller will just require that controller we've created, controllers /grocery, and we can put that controller, that grocery controller, and then use that get all groceries. So we don't actually call the function itself, it's more like a reference to the function. So when you hit this point, then this will be called, and we, in the controller itself, to give back the data, we need to use the data itself, and we just send back the data. And for now, I'll just put this in here like this. So we have the class, the grocery class, and we've got the static method fetch all. So with that, we should be able to run our application. So if we do a node index.js, get listing on port 3000, and if I refresh, /groceries, and now when we go to the groceries route, we get our data back. So just to recap what we did there, using the MVC pattern, we restructured our get request such that it's more scalable and for our CRUD application that we'll create next. But yeah, our node application, we got in Express. We have a server, it's listening for a request. We hit an endpoint, so /groceries, and when we hit this groceries endpoint, we can handle the different cases that it can be. So it can be a get request or post request, for example, and that's done through this grocery routes. So we come to the grocery routes, and we just right now we've only got one get request, but you could easily have a second get request here like this, or a post request or something like that. So that's why we send it to these routes, to be able to handle or ascertain what sort of case we're dealing with. And then when we hit the endpoint, we need to get some sort of response back. So we need some sort of data back. So to connect the route to the view, or the view to the data, we need this controller, because he controls how the data goes from the model to the route or the view. So we make these controllers here, and firstly we make a model, and the model is just a sort of structure for what the class is going to be. So it's just a blueprint. So the grocery, it's going to have an ID 1, 2, 3, 4, an item. Is it milk? Is it bread? And then with that data there, we have this function that we can return, a static function, and we can go ahead and connect that to the route by just calling that function there. So the route gets hit, then we do something, and what we do is we control the data that we have, and this data has its own function associated with it. So these functions are associated with manipulating the data or showing the data in some form, these static functions. And thus when we visit the endpoint, we can see the data come back to us. So that was a introduction to Node, Express, and the MVC pattern that we'll use. In the next video, we'll take a look at all of the CRUD operations, so the create, read, update, delete, and then eventually shortly after, we'll connect to a real database, a MySQL database, and connect to from real data, and then finally we'll hook that up with an Angular front end, and you will also fix up a few things, make it more appropriate for production along the way. So if that's something you're interested in, please check out the next video, and I'll see you then.